Here to talk more about this is our show's favorite economist, Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and the host of the podcast Macro in Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. Steve, welcome back to the show. Happy Tax Day.
Hey, thanks for having me on, you guys.
Thanks for being back. Steve, I'm curious what you have to say about the deficit and decrease in taxes. And I'd also like you to elaborate on what you talked about on a recent podcast on Macro and Cheese, where you say, quote, understanding that taxes don't fund government expenditures at the national level leads to awareness of the vast array of unnecessary political choices that cause pain at every level, including unemployment and homelessness.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful statement. I'm really glad you picked up on that. I think what we're seeing here, based on your lead up to bringing me on, is the fact that we have this outrageously large deficit. And I say outrageous by regular, practical, ordinary vernacular. It looks huge. It's a big number. But the distribution of where that gap went we've talked about the last time I was on the show, and it should be in front of everyone's face, is that all this money went to the top. All this money went to the very, very richest people, the tax cuts that went to the rich, the stimulus money that went to the rich, to corporations. So all this deficit spending really, really went all the way to the tippity top. And it doesn't translate to circulating in the regular economy. So you've got this very important dynamic here that I don't know. I mean, people notice it based on fairness, but this isn't a matter of fairness. This is a matter of the way the plumbing works. If the money doesn't circulate at the bottom, then naturally regular people who spend that money are where a lot of the tax collections for the states come from. So the people at the top, they just pocket that money and put it in some sort of an interest-bearing investment portfolio, and it never sees the real economy. The money, when it's spent down at the bottom, translates into local tax revenues, it translates into state revenues, and it translates into a vibrant economy because the people, they don't have a lot of money. In fact, most people don't even have enough money to get through a single week without pay. So you think about that, and it's like if the regular people don't have their money, and this comes back to that comment you made also about the money owed to tax returns, all that money sitting there, that's not really money that the government cares about. That's new money. It was taxed out, but now it's being given back, but it's brand new money. And so that's money that many people, regular Jane and Joe public, take to buy, food and groceries or go on a vacation. I know a lot of my friends that are in that middle class bracket will often use it to go on a vacation or fix something wrong with their home. So there's that money stimulating the economy, and each time they make a transaction, that's taxed to the local stuff. But what we also see, and I want to make sure I punch this point home, is the federal government is allowing huge amounts of money to not be taxed. All these loopholes and the ability to crack down on tax cheats on the wealthy. What we're realizing is twofold. Number one, the rich play by a separate set of rules. But number two, we're realizing that those tax revenues aren't really revenues at all. That in reality, that money is just gone. It's not in the regular economy. So we're finding that they can spend, but we have a tax difference. Why is that? Because our government creates money every time it spends. So the quote that you gave from the podcast it should now become readily evident that if taxation is not what's funding these programs at the federal level, then why are we acting like we're broke and we can't do these things? Why is there all this hand-wringing to save people? Why is there all this hand-wringing about giving health care? Why is there all this hand-wringing about paying out checks? And it starts to become pretty obvious that we are living in a very bizarre time, man. Very, very bizarre time.
that's one way to put it there, and nothing better highlights it than from a story out today here in the record-breaking revenue and profit news from J.P. Morgan yesterday was quite sickening. J.P. Morgan posted a record $33.8 billion in second quarter revenue and JP Morgan's corporate investment bank posted a record $5.5 billion profit for the second quarter. CNBC credits unprecedented steps taken by the Federal Reserve to support credit markets and the bank's Wall Street division and offsetting losses in two of JP Morgan Chase's four main businesses. Sorry, I don't know why I said Chase. JP Morgan's four main businesses, its consumer and commercial bank. Republicans are telling America's unemployed, Steve, that they may not continue the extra $600 a week of unemployment benefit while JP Morgan is posting records. At what point do people just simply say, this is absolutely absurd? Why am I paying taxes if the Treasury basically is going to print endless money and hand it over to these big banks to sit on?
You know, it's funny. It's more than that, though. I want you to think about this. The money that they spent wasn't just for those banks. It went to these rich people through the major tax cuts. It went to investment type people that are pikers, people that are out there dinking and dunking in Wall Street. And so naturally, JP Morgan's money comes from investment. And that's what happens when you reward the investment class with all these breaks. JP Morgan survives while the rest of us starve. There's an old funny meme. It's not funny at all. It's actually gross, but of Cuba. And they've got this lined wall where on one side everybody sees this beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful landscape, mansions and stuff. And on the other side, you've got the shanty towns and the poverty. And that's what's like in America right now. We literally have this gilded idea as we read the newspaper that the markets are flourishing, that everything is good. And you see JP Morgan raking in record-breaking, money. And at the end of the day, you're seeing clearly the states are floundering. The money's not circulating. You see the people are floundering. They're about to get foreclosed on, et cetera. And who do you think they owe those the tax returns to? I mean, most of the rich people, they didn't even have to pay tax. They just no tax at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're saying. The IRS has said it owes about $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion in unclaimed federal income tax returns to an estimated 1.4 million taxpayers who didn't file in 2016. So as you're mentioning, $1.5 billion. And to your point, Steve, I mean, here in Washington, D.C., and this is well before the coronavirus, the way in which federal subsidies go to developers to run low-income, slum-like condition housing for people is absolutely absurd. So basically, you take federal money and you give it to people that do not live in Washington, D.C. You give it to multimillionaires that live out in Virginia or Maryland, basically to run slum-like conditions. That money then basically just touches the D.C. economy for a half a second and then leaves the city immediately, as opposed to giving that money directly to people that live in the homes that actually can spend it on their own well-being or to spend on their own rent or have management companies and owners actually live in the district to keep that money locally. You're just constantly taking money that could basically recycle itself within the local economies. And then these multimillionaires, like, you only can buy but so much to stimulate the economy. These people are just sitting on the money. They're putting it in banks, or they put it in long-term real estate holdings while people desperately need homes. And they just sit on houses until down the line they can pass it on to their children.
Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. I love what you just said. It's exactly right. And these are the insights that I would like to see more progressive activists, more people, the 99% waking up to. I think that if this is the whole point of my activism, to be quite fair. If Republicans understood this, and I'm not talking about the oligarchs, I'm talking about Jane and Joe public who just think government's not serving their needs, and they decided that the Republicans, at least they call a spade, kind of thing, the tough love thing. These people, if they understood the way this was working, and the progressives, instead of focusing on Robin Hood, realized that we're being starved under a false narrative. If we all pulled together, can you imagine the power of the true 99% to push back against this entire fiasco, this theft, this massive vacuum suctioning all the GDP out of the economy to the top? It's just an unbearable. It's a crime against humanity so severe that no amount of talking about wars for oil or war for imperialism, whatever, can ever do the damage that this austerity narrative, this false scarcity narrative does to the rest of the world. I mean, we are literally starving people right now. We're literally causing great, unbelievable distress in their lives. And I imagine we're going to start hearing numbers about suicide as this cash cliff gets in.
And it's going to get,
this is a crime.
It's going to get worse, Steve. I think it's just staggering. It's going to get worse here as cities like Washington, D.C. I can just speak about my own back door here, and we're here on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., so our listeners know. But as the city continues to actually do quite well in responding to the coronavirus on most days, they're going to start to roll back federal and local subsidies to help support people that have been struggling during the pandemic. And all of a sudden, you're going to take back food subsidies, you take back housing subsidies, unemployment subsidies. Obviously, at a federal level, we already see that the Republican Party is trying to get rid of the extra $600 a month for unemployment insurance. So as the coronavirus somehow doesn't actually get resolved whatsoever, it's getting worse across the country. We're going to see spending change. But Steve, we just have a few minutes left here. I did want to ask you about the IRS itself, as they are probably busy here with the flood of people trying to get in under the wire. There was a fascinating op-ed piece. I thought it was interesting, at least in the New York Times today, titled, "It's never been easy for the rich to evade. It's never been easier for the rich to evade taxes," by Gus Wurzarek. In the piece, Gus talks about the underfunding of the IRS and the huge sums of money that corporations and America's wealthiest owe the U.S. government, which is called the tax gap. Economists estimate the tax gap was around $381 billion a year between 2011 and 2013. The article highlights the cost benefit there is to the IRS. Quoting here the article, "The Internal Revenue Service is one of the few government agencies that make money. For every 33 cents it's in its budget, the IRS collects $100. Its budget to revenue ratio ranks among the lowest for tax collection agencies in the world. In 2013, agents conducted more than 6,000 audits on taxpayers who made more than $5 million. Those audits resulted in about $880 million of recommended additional taxes. That works out to $4,545 for every hour each agent spent on those cases. And the Congressional Budget Office conservatively estimated that adding $20 billion more to the IRS's coffers over the next 10 years would result in $61 billion more in revenue." Steve, again, how big of a problem is this of actual cash flow, and how much of it is an issue of fairness?
So it's all an issue of fairness, because cash flow is irrelevant here. In what you're talking about, you need to understand, and I can't stress this enough, that federal taxes are literally deleted. They purge reserves from the system. That's all they do, period. They are not recycled. They are not reused. This concept of revenue is a concept that allows us all to feel like the money that they're taking from us in taxes are going to something. But in reality, we'll call it an inflation, tax, so to speak. It's really there simply to control inflation and drive the need for the dollar. So this concept of they're bringing in all this revenue and they're paying for themselves, well, in reality, those dollars are deleted. So it's all about, like, Santa Claus telling you he's going to put a lump of coal in your stocking if you're not a good boy or a good girl. These are sweet lies we tell each other, like FDR's lie that he told about how we fund Social Security. I mean, it's the same exact thing. We believe we pay into it. So by that belief, we feel like taxpayer this and taxpayer that, when it's a completely bad dynamic. It's a false narrative. It's not the way it really works. And so the CBO, I consider a front organization that understands the truth, but they sit there and they help peddle the lie to keep us feeling like somehow or another, if we don't chase after these phantoms, that we can't do nice things for the people. And this is the shield, this is the veil that they use to hide behind austerity. And until we rip the Band-Aid off and accept that those taxes are just being purged from the system, and that spending is not in any way, shape, or form conditional in tax receipts, until we understand that, we're going to continue chasing the wrong thing, and the wealthy are going to keep laughing all the way to the bank, and J.P. Morgan's going to keep getting record highs. And that right there is the big reveal. That is the big reveal. If you're going to have a reveal, that's the big reveal that days like tax day are. Years ago, we wanted to have a major march on Washington on tax day to tell everybody to stand in front of the IRS, to stand in front of the Federal Reserve, and tell them we know that you could do nice things for us right now. You could do it right now, but you choose not to. And it's that dynamic that we have got to purge from our vernacular and make sure that we stop thinking about this in terms of taxpayer dollars. Otherwise, they're going to keep using that against us to keep us starving. And that right there, my friend, is the reveal on this day, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Steve Grumbine, for that very revealing interview there here on Tax Day 2020. Steve Grumbine, founder and CEO of the nonprofit Real Progressives and Real Progressives in Action, and the host of the podcast Macro in Cheese. Steve, thanks again for joining us. Where can people find more of you and your work online?
We're getting ready to launch our new website at www.realprogressives.org. You can always find me on my podcast, macroandcheese.com. And I'm on Twitter as Austerity is Murder. And, of course, we're on Facebook.
Fantastic. Steve Grumbine, thank you as always. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.